3, 2.
Welcome back to your Pelvic Health Podcast. My name is Susan Winograd, owner and founder of Pelvic Core Rehab, and I am thrilled to be your host, and I am so excited that you are joining us today. I am super excited about our guest today. Her name is Amalia Brassfield, and she is a movement and breath specialist. Anybody that has heard any of my other podcasts or has seen me knows that I am obsessed with breath. I pretty much believe that any system in the body can be changed, can be healed using the breath as a vehicle. And that is why when Amalia came to me after having her beautiful, beautiful son, because she wanted to make sure that she healed properly, we had an instant connection. Anybody that is obsessed with breath as much as I am is an immediate friend of mine. Amalia, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad we finally did this.
I know, me too. You've been on my list before I even started doing the podcast. I created a list of guests, and you have been at the top of my list. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course, Amalia, your background is so interesting. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself? Because I know that I will not do it justice.
Well, I generally just go with the breath and movement specialist because I've had a lot of certifications and different kinds of trainings and lots of experience, which honestly, all of it, the training is a great foundation, but I would say it's about 5% of what I know and 95% is just teaching.
Yes.
And it's
and living it.
Right. And I have to, I experience it all in my own body. And then those are the cues that end up telling me go. And that's how I even started becoming a movement teacher, is that I was a hairstylist in my early 20s and I had terrible sciatica. And the only person, I didn't even know what that was, but I found out because I was like, oh, I have this terrible pain in my butt. And the only other person I'd ever heard that had it was my grandpa. And I was like, oh, me and my grandpa. Oh. I was like, I am 21. This is not okay. I need to do something about this. But I was on my feet, high heels, night job, day job, and I was just taking advantage of my body, and it bit back, which it does. And my body likes to do that maybe sooner than others, but I think that's because it was always going to be a vehicle for my learning.
Yeah.
And so I got into Pilates, and that was like my first avenue into teaching movement. And then, just it bloomed tremendously over time.
I can see that. We've had many conversations, and you're such a wealth of knowledge. Can you tell our listeners how you sort of went into diving into the breath and what is the breath good for? Why did that interest you? I know why I love it, but I always love to hear other perspectives and point of views because, we're all coming at it from a unique place and a certain perspective and lens.
Absolutely. What you stated about the breath in the opening is exactly, we're aligned 100%. It's an access point to everything else in the body. So I could probably sit here for almost the entire podcast and answer that one question. So I'm going to try to dial it back and just say that.
That's what we're here to talk about. So it's
right.
good.
So the breath is an involuntary function that you can make a voluntary function. And you cannot reach inside your brain and push buttons, and you cannot reach inside your heart and slow it down or speed it up. But you can alter your breath to alter those other organs in the body and their functions. And, of course, you can alter the breath to connect muscularly, change posture, change mood in an instant. I mean, it's a tool that, most people have a hard time meditating, but they know it's really good for them. But breath work, then you have something to do, a sensation change that's instantaneous. It's so much more gratifying. And we're built that way. Us Western people, we need something to do and immediate gratification, and breath gives that to us.
It's so true. And that's such a great way to think about it. What I always tell my clients when I'm teaching them about the breath is that what you you just said that the breath can change our emotions. It can change our thoughts. It can change the way we feel physically. And when I'm going through the evaluation process with the clients and I look at the way they breathe and the mechanics of their breath, I always say that breathing is the number one priority of our brain. In order to stay alive, we need to be breathing. So when we teach our brain a better option for breathing or a different option for breathing, our brains will want to integrate that. So it is such a beautiful entry point because it is a huge priority of our brain. So I think that we need to talk about it more and we need to use it more to facilitate movement and healing and support and, modulating our emotions and our stress. I absolutely love that. And I think that when I say it to clients that way, that it's like a huge aha moment, like, oh yeah, you're right. Like I didn't never realized why breath is so important, even though it's so intuitive.
Yeah, I think that we live in a culture that really undervalues or teaches us not to value subtlety and simplicity.
Yeah.
And so when we can sit here and honestly say that if you get good sleep, drink clean water, eat good food, and breathe well, that you'll, like 99% of what ails people is no longer a factor. Like people resist it. They resist it.
Yes.
They don't want it to be that simple.
we definitely overcomplicate things.
And that's because we live in a consumer culture that has been bombarding us with other more flashy ways of solving your problems. And we've been trained subconsciously or unconsciously to believe that they are more valid avenues to healing what ails us. And really, they're just an answer. I think those things are sort of the answer to the stuff that hurt you in the beginning, sort of. It's like that in that same category.
It's like a Band-Aid. I mean, I know there are so many things in pelvic health where, marketing and advertising really change the way we think right? So sit on this seat and your body will do 10,000 Kegels in 20 seconds, right? Or, or put this clip on your ear and your vagus nerve will instantly be, stimulated and you'll get a calming effect. Everybody in our world wants a quick fix. They want to put a Band-Aid on it and they want instant gratification. And I love what you said, that we can get instant gratification through the breath.
Right.
But I think it's important to articulate that there are things in our bodies that need maintenance.
Time.
Right?
Yes,
patience and
grace.
Time and grace and,
all the things we need to cultivate for balance within our entire lives. Right.
It doesn't have to be complicated. That maintenance process can be a breath practice. But I think, a lot of times when people come to me, they think they're going to come for 6, 8, 10, 12 sessions of physical therapy and they're good and they're done. And what I've started telling people is I will help you to get to that healing, body optimized, pain-free place. But is there going to be work beyond the time that you're here? Absolutely. And I think, breathing is a beautiful way to incorporate that. I just had a client who I did her initial assessment, and she was a pelvic organ prolapse client, a great woman. I did the evaluation, and my colleague took over the treatments. And the first session, she really focused on the breath. And I got a call that this client wanted to talk to me. And she said, I really enjoyed my session with the other therapist, but is the breathing really that important? Aside from the fact that we had gone over the importance on the initial assessment. And I said, it's not that important. It's the most important. And she was like, oh, wow. Okay, I see. And, we went through all the reasons why that was. But I think part of my mission and my purpose as a pelvic health therapist is to help people understand that it is one of the most important things.
I mean, like you said, you do it every day. You need it to live. And when you optimize something that happens every day and many times a day, like walking, standing, sitting, breathing, then you have an impact on the body and your health and all the layers of health much more than anything you can do in a concentrated physical session, like exercise or whatever. It's like you want your thoracic spine to be more mobile, do all the back bends in the world.
Right.
Isn't going to move the needle until you breathe well, because every breath is supposed to move those back ribs on inhale and exhale. And if they are locked down, then they can't, they're in breath, then they're not going to move in your movement practice.
Absolutely.
So impacting the body that way is really the most impactful.
Yeah, I have clients, I've worked the entire session on just back body breathing. That's their homework, getting back or side body breathing or front body breathing. That breath needs to be 360 degrees. This is interesting, Amalia, because I always send, people and guests prep docs, and I read your prep doc and I was like, this is fascinating because I loved your perspectives and we are so in line, but I want to first tell our listeners and read to them your perspective and then how I kind of changed it to my perspective, which is really the chicken or the egg, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and discuss that. So when we were talking about like, what are we going to talk about? You said, let's talk about how we can use movement to facilitate healing physically and emotionally. And how does that integrate with the breath, which I loved. And then I was like, I love that question and I want to talk about it, but I think I would have framed it as how we can use the breath to facilitate the movement and support during movement. So I think that the moral of the story is that there are many rivers, one ocean. Right.
Well, and they're so linked that you can't separate them.
You cannot separate them. Yeah. And I think it was like almost like a field of vision. We had like this route that we were both looking at, and we just had our periphery went in different directions, but they're really so blended. So can you tell us, as a breath and movement specialist, let's like talk about both. How can we use the breath to facilitate ease of movement and support during movement?
Okay, so we're focusing on the movement right now.
Yeah, how we can use breath to facilitate the movement.
Okay, breath and core connection are the same thing, basically, right?
The core is led by the breath.
Absolutely, right? So, it can be very simple, or we can break it down to something simple, right? Like that you want to exhale on exertion. You want to feel your transverse abdominis support the spine and organs when you're, bearing the heaviest load, or, so that's kind of like the gross body stuff.
Yes.
But also, so people don't feel very well, if you know what I mean. Like they don't feel subtlety at all. And a lot of the time they don't even feel like gross sensations. So my first session will be, okay, do this movement. It's a simple movement. Now tell me what you feel.
I love that.
And they say, or I'll say, where do you feel this? And they say, I don't know. They don't even, it's not like, oh, they feel it here and they should be feeling it there, but they actually, a lot of them can't even put a finger on where they feel the sensation in their body. And that's a gross level, like disconnect from sensation. And breath is subtle, right? It's not your quads burning, right? It's quieter. Yeah. And pelvic floor is subtle, and it's right until it's not. It's subtle, and whatever thing is happening could be happening for years and years and years. You have no clue, and then boom, something's wrong, right? Yeah. But it's been happening for years, and it's because we're not in tune with subtlety.
We're not in tune to the messages our body is giving us and communicating to us. Right. I always say our bodies talk to us. We just have to listen.
Absolutely. So the breath is a language that the body speaks, right? And you can speak back to it with the breath too. So you can find yourself in a position and notice what what comes up, what sensation comes up, what emotion comes up, whatever, and what kind of breath comes up. And then you can use the breath to change the experience of the position in the body. You can use the breath to change the quality of movement. You can use the breath to literally feel, you first felt that here, now you feel it there. Complete. To the eye, the movement hasn't changed.
Right.
Right? But where the sensation, where the neuromuscular connection is happening can be directed by simply using your imagination or your visualization and your breath.
Yeah.
And so breath is like a tool. So before we even start movement, sometimes we just tune into, well, we always start with breath to be able to feel what it feels like. What's the difference between that clamping down Kegel feeling that most people do? Most people kind of clamp and close on a Kegel versus kind of lift.
Correct.
Right? And so we need to understand the difference, because the lower transverse abdominis integrates with the pelvic floor in a way that you have to be able to differentiate that clamp versus that lift in order to support the lower back, to keep the organs where they belong, you know, all those things. And that doesn't happen in static breath. You can't hold your breath very well and get that dynamic feeling of the pelvic floor and the lower transverse. So those are subtleties. People are not used to walking into a movement session and starting with that. And sometimes they're dubious. They just want abs. They want you to fix their pain. They want you to fix the problem. That whatever it is that they come in with the expectation of
the quick fix.
And it's not their fault, because that is what people have been taught to seek, right?
Yes.
So it's just it's you know, no fault of their own, but you know, the people that stick with me, number one, the pain goes away so fast.
Yeah.
Right? Because all of a sudden you're listening and respecting your body in a way that you weren't before. And, you know, that it comes down to feeling and listening and breathing, and then you can build on top of that foundation.
And you can heal because now you've located or isolated or really understand where you're feeling something and really where is it coming from initially. What we do I love that you said visualization, because that is really that's really how I teach breath, is using visual imagery. I find when I'm working with a client and I tell them to direct their breath, you know, let's do umbrella breathing or 360-degree breathing. The focus there, the intention is on opening an umbrella. You want to visualize your rib cage being an umbrella. When we are directing the breath to the pelvic floor, the intention is to release, lengthen, and broaden. And the visual imagery I use a lot is visualize a flower blooming petal by petal. And people are like, well, isn't the breath the breath? And I was once in an Upledger craniosacral course, and the craniosacral instructor said something so powerful that I will never forget. He said, the most direct path to healing is intention. So when you're breathing, you can have the intention to send the breath somewhere so that you can feel what's going on there. And I find that the best vehicle to do that is visual imagery paired with the breath.
Yes.
And it's mind-boggling to people when they're like, oh yeah, I can feel that differently. One of the things that we do at Pelvic Core Rehab is we assess somatosensory dysregulation, which means that we are looking at how our brain interprets the feelings in our body. And very, very often, people do have somatosensory dysregulation. Like you said, they don't know where they're feeling it. They feel completely disconnected from a certain part of their body. And when you can close that gap and make the connection, beautiful things happen.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So we talked about that. Is there anything that we can add about using movement to facilitate the breath? Is there anything that we can add to that? Like, is there a certain kind of movement that you like to facilitate certain kinds of breath?
Well, okay, so I feel like that's a two-part question.
Okay. We can answer it in two parts.
Yeah, so as far as movement or body positions, of course, like it can be very literal. I've actually done a lot of like reading and research about all the breath nerds in history and how, you know, I think we both read that breath book.
James Nestor. I love
that
it.
woman in Germany who had severe scoliosis and literally just put her body in the positions that she needed to open and intentionally breathed that part of the body back into alignment, and then did that for generations of scoliosis patients that could not find any treatment or relief anywhere else. And she was like, you know, like a charlatan and a cast out at first. And then she was like, you know, the best thing ever, and national awards and whatnot at the end of her career, because, you know, it's like, again, we resist the obvious, we resist the simplicity. But if you need to breathe into your back more, lay on your stomach. Yeah. You can't expand into the floor. The back body doesn't have any other choice but to expand, and you can feel it, and that feedback is so helpful.
Yes.
So, a lot of people have trouble. A lot of people have a posture of lifted ribs in order to, that's like, it makes us look skinnier or bustier or something, the gripping of the abs, right? Mm-hmm. So the lifted rib cage, it really shuts down the back body.
Yeah, and shortens it.
Right. So then you're not inhaling into that structure in the back, right? So it's only the front ribs expanding, the back ribs are locked down. So the sensation of the back expanding is not familiar. People are not tuned into that. And then you lay on the belly and then you breathe and you can feel the ribs expand and rise and fall. And that sensation is so easy and tangible to tune into.
I love that. I also love to practice back body breathing in like a low, on a low stool or on a low curb where you're like hugging your knees. You want to sort of downplay those front ribs in any way you can and then focus on the back. It's also side lying in like a fetal position. Hugging a pillow is a great way to do that. I always encourage my clients to practice everything in different positions because our brains need different
feedback and stimulus.
different feedback, different experiences, different contexts, right? So I love that.
And the other part is that just okay, so I'm backtracking a little to the first thing that we're talking about, but it overlaps. The people are really like, what kind of breath should I use for blank? And I just wanted to say, like public service announcement, that if you are doing intentional breath of any kind, you're like 90% there.
Yeah.
It really almost doesn't matter what kind of breathing you're doing. If you have slowed down enough to think about where is it going? How does it feel? It doesn't matter if you're holding it, if it's long. I mean, you can do mouth breath, nose breath, alternate nostril. I mean, there's that being said, there are scientific studies to support the benefits of different things, different kinds of breath for different things. And
I always say there's no bad breath. There's just different breaths for different purposes, right?
And the bad breath is, I think, whatever the only bad breath is, obviously it's keeping you alive, but a breath that is continuing to hold you in a pattern, right? Because the pattern in your body it's on a loop because of the breath. So if you created a posture out of stress, and then that posture, the bones are in a certain place because of that posture, and that alters the breath and how the structures can expand and contract and whatever, where the air pressure can move inside the body. And then, maybe that's kind of hardened, it's in there. And if you haven't done any mindful changing of that, then your breath is sending the signal to your body, and your brain it's all a loop, that you're still in that experience of stress, right? So breath keeps you alive. Thank goodness it's involuntary. So I'm not going to say there is no bad breath. I'm 100% with you.
Right.
But a breath or a movement pattern that reinforces pain, injury, trauma, stress needs to be upgraded in order for that to be healed.
Yeah, and I think breath is also, I love what you said, that it's a cycle. So when we are in a certain pattern, right, and we're perpetuating, let's say, a painful cycle, our brain strengthens that pathway, and we need 100%. To create new pathways that are non-painful, and the breath is a beautiful vehicle to do that. So very often we use the breath to create a new novel experience for the brain that's non-painful, that it doesn't have a pattern for or a pathway yet to train it away from the brain. And I think another thing that's really important is you said every breath is great. There's no bad breath. Our bodies need variability, right?
100%,
so many people, many people are like, well, you taught me to breathe like this, but what happens when I run? I'm like, don't think about it so much, just run. Make sure that you're breathing, but our brains need variability. And when that made me think of it when you said that we perpetuate a pattern because of pain.
Right.
When we do that, we're essentially usually eliminating some degree of variability.
Yes.
And we need to reintroduce that.
Yes, because it's unconscious.
Yes.
And unconsciousness creates ruts.
Yes.
So that's in our behavior, in our way of thinking, in our way of movement, our way of breath. When we are in a rut, we're not thinking about how we're doing it. We're just doing the same thing on muscle memory or just habit. that is never good for us.
Yeah, I agree. And it's really about survival, honestly.
Yes.
It's not we can't blame it on the brain. Don't blame it on the brain. It's your body, your brain will do whatever it needs to do to get the job done.
Absolutely.
Even if it's not the most optimal way. Then we need to take control of our thoughts and control of our actions and say, hey, I'm realizing that this is not the most optimal way to do it. Let me make a conscious decision to change something, right?
Yes, so that analogy works so well, whether it's pain or emotional pain, right?
I was just about to go there next. That's a great segue.
Okay, perfect. So when we have an injury, a physical injury, the fascia knits up around the injury to limit mobility, right, so that we can heal. Right. But the fascia doesn't unknit when you're healed.
Right.
So it will stay knit, and you will stay in the movement pattern of injury until you mindfully work the movement, the fascia, back into a more healthy and broader range, right? And our emotions and our our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system does the same thing. Like, it does the survival thing. It helps protect you when you need protecting. It limits your ability to perceive and experience subtlety and all of that while you're getting too much information, too much stimulus, pain, whatever. That is a beautiful, helpful thing that our body and our brain does for us. But it doesn't unknit. It doesn't take you out of that protection pattern until you mindfully go into that space, acknowledge the healing, and do the work, whether that's deep tissue, whether that's breath, whatever it needs to be done. But until you do that, the body or the brain, the emotions are still experiencing the injury, the pain, the stress of that initial, whatever.
Correct. It has to be a mind-body, whole person approach, right? And just from a physiological perspective, we have so many layers of fascia going in all different directions, right? And they're all supposed to slide and glide over each other. When we have an injury, I always visualize it like a roll of saran wrap that's, rolled around and around. Now, if you have like coconut oil between every layer of the saran wrap, it's going to slide and glide beautifully. But if it gets dried up, it's going to stick together and you'll get stuck. You'll have sticky spots. That coconut oil, if you will, there's a substance in our fascia called ground substance. And when there is trauma or tension, that ground substance can dry up. But we can reconstitute that with breath and movement. And I think, again, there's so many ways to explain things. Like you just explained it one way, and I think I just explained it a little more physiological. And again, many rivers, one ocean, but I love to just look at things and explain it to people in a different lens, because some people want anatomical, physiological perspective. Some people want to look at it a little more creatively through the breath. So I love all of that. How do you notice stress and trauma manifesting in the body through the breath? What are like some things that the breath can tell you that can give you clues that you're holding stress and trauma?
Well, I think we definitely already touched on that, but I'll go into a little bit more specific. So, if you have, some kind of, stress, pain, whatever, something, and the body starts to shift in the posture, and then we hold the posture. So that's your pelvic floor, your psoas muscles, your traps, those muscles come right to mind as they respond in a more acute fashion to stress. Right. So then the traps are elevating your shoulder blades and pulling them forward, and you're in a protection shell mode. And then that creates a posture that doesn't relax even when you feel like your relaxed arms swinging. They're just still up there.
Yeah.
And people can see that and kind of see, if they're in tune, see a person that has that posture and notice that they're housing some stress. But that same thing is happening in the pelvic floor, and we can't see it.
Yeah.
And the psoas muscles too. That's the muscles that attach the thigh bones into the spine. And it's, I see, people obviously sit too much. That's a big problem, right?
Yeah.
But also that chronic pain and crankiness around the hip creases, and just that the whole pelvic area is just this ocean of knowledge and packed in emotions and experiences that come up when you're trying to work with movement and breath in that area. And it really does start with, like something like, something traumatic, whether it's pain or emotional pain, physical pain or emotional pain. But it's also traumatic to sit in front of a desk all day.
Yeah.
It really energetically is. And we were doing that at age 5. Yeah. We were developing that way.
We're not created. We're not designed as humans to sit as much as we do.
So it basically, you can say, oh, I'm not that person. I don't have trauma. I'm not that stressed out, whatever. You are, because inherently we're not built for this. Our human animal is not designed to be sitting as much, to be in as much traffic, see as many lights and sounds and dings and stimulus. And so our body is experiencing trauma, and we have dysautonomia. Almost everyone has parasympathetic and sympathetic, dysregulation, and breath can help you to do that. But to find it, it's very interesting to test people's ranges of motion and find where, the straddle is very difficult for some people. Those people tend to have a little bit more issue with vulnerability because that's such a protection area, right? Then we have, the people, the posterior hip, the sciatica, the butt pain, the lower back pain. That, or the psoas pain, like I was talking about, everything in the body can kind of tell you something about where their mind is, what they, and those shoulders up is the perfect example of that. It's just somebody kind of walking around holding stress in their body.
In protective mode.
Protective mode, yes.
Absolutely. And one thing that you said really resonated to me and that I really would like to expand on is that you're right. We can't see what's going on in the pelvic floor, and that's why it's so overlooked for so long in so many people. So you can't see like you can in your biceps or your hamstrings whether your pelvic floor muscle is holding too much tension. But what we need to do is teach people how to feel it, because you can feel it.
Yes.
I had a great conversation with Kelly Terry from Barwis Physical Therapy. She was on my last episode.
I saw a little bit about
yeah, we were talking about high-level athletes and how in high-level athletes, they load the system, and they really do these repetitive movements to attain peak performance in their sport, right? But if we were runners, we would stretch our hamstrings. If you were a weightlifter, you would probably stretch your lats and your pecs. But we have to release the pelvic floor regularly, because hopefully our deep core system is what is generating that support. Right. And we were saying that if we can really integrate more deep core work with higher level athletes, I believe that their performance would be better. There would be less incidence of incontinence.
Yes.
The other thing, so I think we need to teach clients what to feel in their deeper systems of their body. And also, our body's first reaction to stress is going to be muscle tension, so which often shows up in the pelvic floor, in the traps. But I almost always know what a person's personality type is going to be based on how I see them breathing when they walk in. If people just stop for a second and they have this chest breath and they have this shallow, rapid breath, I know they're holding tension somewhere. Right.
They're in full fight or flight. They're just sitting right in front of you.
Yeah.
Might as well be being chased by a lion.
Yes, literally, just like that. And then I, have people that come in and I can see that they're just at more ease and seem a little more peaceful. And almost always they've done some
work in that
breath work, which is so interesting to see, because you can almost look at someone and be able to visualize it. Amalia, I think a lot of people equate meditation with breath. What's the difference?
Oh, well, it's such a broad, meditation is such a broad definition. But I think that, meditation is really about mindfulness. I think that there is a misunderstanding of meditation that we're meant to empty the brain, but really we're just supposed to be the observer of the thoughts, because our brains were meant to think. And I think people get very frustrated with meditation because they just keep noticing their mind wandering, and they feel they're failing on each moment that they're not empty-headed. And the fact is that they're noticing the thought, and that is the meditation. They're being the observer. They're being the third party. They're disconnecting from identification with the mind. They're not saying, I am these thoughts, and these thoughts are running me, bop, 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 bop.
Right.
No, I'm watching them. They're just, and I can watch it, and then I can bring it back to somewhere else, because the person really pulling the strings, the entity, is beyond the mind, and that's me.
Right.
And that's the practice of meditation. However, people don't love to play that game. And I think that breath is this fantastic way to give somebody a thing to do that creates a very immediate body sensation of transcendence,
Yes.
of more subtle sensations, heightened sensations. You're feeling a different state. And we want to feel a different state. I mean, we need that escape. That's why we're doing the meditation. We want to be in a different place. And breath really takes you there so fast. It's so effective. And so I was a person who struggled with the idea of, like, I know I need to meditate, but I can't. And when breath came into my life in a more intentional way, where at first it was a means to an end as far as movement and core connection. That's kind of my first understanding of breath through Pilates and all of that. But when I realized how much it could do for me mentally, that I suffered from insomnia since I was before I can remember. I couldn't fall asleep as a 1, 2, 3-year-old. I remember my entire life just staying up, staring at the ceiling, could not fall asleep. I just integrated a breath practice at night, and literally within a week I was sleeping within 10, 15 minutes, and it was 30 years of not being able to sleep.
That's another great example of it doesn't have to be so complicated, right? It could be a simple practice. There's a video that I absolutely love. I'm going to put the link to it in the show notes. It's a YouTube video. This adorable monk talks about quieting your monkey mind. So first, before I talk about the monkey mind, one thing that I am constantly saying in my office is that I don't believe that anybody's good at meditation. That Tibetan monk who's sitting on a mountain meditating does a lot of practicing. Meditation is a skill that needs to be practiced in high volume in order for your brain to integrate it as something meaningful. So when someone comes to me and says, I'm not good at meditation, my answer is, you haven't practiced long enough, right? Practice makes permanent. But we can also, I completely agree with you that when we're meditating, we're not supposed to clear the mind. We really can acknowledge and notice what is going on in our lives, like a slideshow, but we can use the breath to redirect the thoughts, right?
Absolutely.
So in the monkey mind video, if you want to stop the monkey mind, just notice the breath. Breathe in, breathe out.
And then you might travel off, and then you're like, darn,
Yeah.
I failed. But instead of having the darn, I failed feeling, you can say, oh, look at me. I had a thought. I am the
Yes.
observer. I'm going to bring it back to breath or flame or om or whatever else that you're
Yes.
focusing on. That's why I love the breath and doing things that are a little bit more give you a focal point.
Yes.
Loving kindness meditation is great. Yeah, just something that gives you but I like a physical sensation, because
Yes.
that transcendent place that you're talking about that the monks have, I have been there. And now I can't get there all the time, but just knowing what that feels like, it's like I've been to the top of the mountain, you guys. It is a real thing.
It's a real thing.
It's a real thing. It's phenomenal. And just knowing that it's there and real sort of helps me on every attempt at calming myself, even if it's 2 or 3 breaths sitting in the car in traffic. And that is from breath. The reason I got there is because I took my body with me. It wasn't just a mind thing.
That's an amazing way to put it. You took your body with you.
Yeah, I needed the sensations in order to leave my body. I needed to be able to elevate and feel different before I could just, poof.
Transcend it.
Yes.
Transcend it. Amalia,
Yeah.
this is such an amazing conversation, and I could talk about the breath forever. What are some takeaways that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Okay. So I think that people like actionable things.
I agree.
So I'm just gonna talk about a few different breaths. So the first thing I said was that all intentional breath is good breath, and I stand by it 100%.
Amen.
But sometimes maybe people prefer a frame because maybe just sitting and just watching the breath isn't as like giving them enough feedback, you know.
Or stimulation.
Stimulation, yes, almost the same,
Yeah.
right? So the first thing that I would like to offer is something called box breath. And it's called that because it's 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds hold, 5 seconds exhale, 5 seconds hold.
I love that. I
Right.
use it all the time.
Right, and you can picture it, and it's super easy, and it just slows you down. And so I will say that this is kind of a meat and potatoes breath practice, right?
I agree.
This isn't for something specific, it's for everything, right? It's just to be able to, and it does give you the feeling, the juicy feeling. In a couple of breaths, the surface of the skin feels a little more tingly, right? The jaw softens. You can feel that parasympathetic shift, you know, or the sympathetic shift into parasympathetic. And, you know, the feedback that your body gives you is it's just like when you eat something sweet and your body says, yes, please give me more of that. The body does the same thing with the breath. And we want to get those yummy feelings so that, you know, you have this subconscious driver to do more because it's good for you, you know?
I love that. I also love incorporating visualization with box breathing or alternate nostril breathing, where I will say, okay, what color feels therapeutic or healing to you? And let's say it's blue. And then I'll ask them, okay, what color are you feeling in your body now? And many times if it's pain, they'll say red or orange. And I'll say, okay, I want you to practice that box breathing until that orange slowly starts to transition to blue. And when it's going, you know, to a shade of blue that feels good to you all around the box, then you know you're in a good place.
That's great. Yeah, I love any kind of, like, you have you know, you're using imagery. I'm using more sensations. I'm a really sensation-oriented kind of person, but everyone kind of has a gravitation. And when you work with someone privately, you can pick up on that really well, right?
Absolutely. And some people are both.
For sure. I mean, I like to picture things anatomically. Like I always say, it doesn't matter if you're right, but picture it. Picture what does it look like to have your femur head roll around in the hip socket? What does that look like? I love that. What does it look like to watch your diaphragm stretch down to expand the lungs?
Delicious.
Right. So I do an anatomical meditation, breath meditation, where I start like the nasal passages and the throat open and the rib cage and the diaphragm, because we need to be able to picture the structures, even if it's not a perfectly anatomically correct image in our mind. Right. It's irrelevant, because it's the sensation creating the image, and getting those two things to meet is
beautiful.
money.
Beautiful. I love it. So that's box breathing.
Right. And should we do it, or should we just move on to the
I think box breathing is pretty straightforward. Yeah, pretty straightforward. Let's go on to one more.
Okay. So I am certified in a more unique, lesser known breath work called gamma breathing. And it is utilized for a lot of stuff, but something that's like special about it is that it's supposed to help neutralize charges and brainwave patterns. And so it's used in like in an alternative therapy practice, where people are trying to, you know, kind of process out bad habits, trauma, you know, things that where you feel like you're in a rut or a loop, and it's affecting, you know, your current life, even though maybe it happened a long time ago, and it's just hard to break the pattern. Well, we definitely have patterns. Our brains are very predictive machines. You know, by the time we turn 5 years old, we're starting to fill in the blanks to an extent that we will never be truly aware of. And that is a huge benefit as far as survival, but it's a disservice to a lot of other elements of ourselves, like our ability to be creative, create new patterns. And if we're in a pattern of pain or stress, it makes it much harder to get out of the pattern. Yeah.
Especially in today's world that we live in, because everybody's on devices so much, we have less variability in our experiences and less variability in our contexts, right? There was a great commercial where, like, when I was a kid, my mom was always like pulling me into, you know, the house at 8 o'clock at night. We were outside playing all the time, riding our bikes, rollerblading, roller skating. And now we're pulling the kids out of the house because they just want to be in their bedrooms on their phones. So kids have less variability in their contextual experiences.
That's why I'm moving to Mexico.
I know. Good for you. Good for you. My youngest is 17. I still try with him, but I think it's like I'm behind the 8 ball with that. All the power to you, girlfriend.
Mine's 3.5. We're hoping for the best.
Yes.
He still wants the screen.
Yeah, so
Anyway,
let's do the gamma breathing.
So gamma breathing, there's actually many, many patterns. So the therapist will utilize different patterns of breath to access or whatever, different kinds of brainwave patterns based on your responses. But there is a simple kind of go-to meat and potatoes part of breath, gamma breath, that I use 90% of the time because it just works and it's more simple.
Oh, please share.
Okay, so it's 30-second breaths, or not 30-second breaths, 3-second breaths, inhaling through the nose or mouth, and I'll just tell you you're going to breathe through the nose or mouth. So, for instance, the first one is mouth. That means inhale through the mouth, exhale through the mouth.
Okay,
then
so
mouth, nose, inhale.
Ooh, I love that.
And nose. Okay,
So walk me through it. We'll do
we'll
it
just
together.
we're going to do 3 rounds of it. So
Okay.
we're actually going to feel it and experience it.
I
for a
love
moment,
it.
okay?
I'm on board.
Okay, so just take a moment to feel your body because we're very in intellect and we have to just kind of shift into somatics a bit. Yes, I love it. We're in the same spot. Okay, so first breath is mouth, mouth. Mouth, nose. Nose, nose. Nose, mouth. Mouth, mouth. Mouth, nose. Nose, nose. Nose, mouth. Mouth, mouth. Mouth, nose. Nose, nose. Nose, mouth. Mouth, mouth. And just pause and drop into sensation. This helps to release a lot of those feel-good hormones in the brain. So you're just tapping into that shift. As we mentioned before, awareness creates reality. So we want to feel any shift we've created to expand upon it. So Susan, do you feel any shift in the way that you feel mentally or physically?
That was amazing, Amalia.
I feel weird right now opening my eyes.
Yeah, me too. I feel like I was in a different place. Actually,
too.
my fingers feel a little tingly. And I've been going the whole day.
Yes.
I felt a little lightheaded. Like my brain is not used to getting that much oxygen today, which means I probably need to do it again.
It up. Yeah. I know I can feel actually my hands, I think because there's a bit of like onness and nerves that come with doing this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I felt myself starting very tight, like very abnormally tight. And then I released and I got a little sweaty palms, you know, your nervous system shifts. And
that was beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Amalia, we may have to do a part 2.
I would love to. When I'm in Mexico, we should do it.
We could do
the
Mexican
Mexican edition.
I should come to Mexico and do it with you.
All right.
Final thought.
Okay. Final thought. This is like my mission, kind of.
I love it. Let's hear it.
Okay, so I mean, I guess I have more than one, but this is like at the very top. So the brain and the nervous system create postures and movement patterns, which create, pain or whatever. And, it's all cyclical. So those things, the pain, the movement patterns, the postures create the breath patterns. And we can access that through the breath, and we also are shown it through the breath. So when we see our breath tightening up, it's telling us, and then when we need to do something about it, we can use the breath. And the same thing with the brain. We can alter our thoughts to change the breath. We can alter our body position to change the breath. We can use each one, so they're all so connected. Yeah. And I think that my point, which wasn't super eloquently stated, is that everything is so integrated that the simple answer is to just slow down and feel your body. And it will tell you, it's an access point to all kinds of intuition and will help you make all of these decisions you have to make 1,000,000 times a day.
I agree.
And that way you can do it from a centered place instead of having to do it from programming or expectations or, all the pressures that we feel externally driving us that make us feel so contracted. If we can tune into that feeling in the body and use it as like a barometer for where are we, where is the thought coming from, how do I feel physically when I'm having that thought, we can gauge whether or not that's a positive or negative place to go in our lives.
That's an amazing final thought. Thank you so much for that. And I would say my final thought is pain is an experience that we have in our body, and that we can use the breath to change that experience. So thank you so much for being here, Amalia. This was a great start to a conversation. And thank you all for listening. This is your Pelvic Health Podcast, where we give you the real lowdown on all pelvic health matters. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and please leave us a 5-star review. That allows us to continue to bring you information that you want to hear. And if you found this episode helpful, please share and tag us. And remember, healing requires a total body approach, and that you need to be your own best advocate.
Absolutely. Yes. All right.
Awesome.